so I started working with him, and so it's been a while since I've seen him, which I always look at it as a good thing because I don't really need a lot of work. So people always ask me, it's a loaded question, who do you go to? Who do you work with? And the loaded question is people not from this world. And so that's a dreaming world. So this person of Asian descent who's operating in this, we could call it another dimension that's operating alongside of this one. We could call it, I call it a dreaming world. It's one of the worlds of the dreaming worlds because it shows us how not solid this world is, right? If we could go back and forth, if we had enough power and energy and interact with different people from, different worlds in a really sober way. What happens though is people start taking these dreaming medicines and they go through doorways into worlds where there's a lot of other beings who want to come back to our world or, want to utilize our energy flow instead of helping us, which is a parasitic situation. So there's a lot different in how you approach these worlds and how you go in and out of them. And like with this one, with my Asian teacher and the guy who works with me, and it could also be that that's how he shows himself to me because, that also may be easier for him to work on me by showing me, something that I need in order to help me that seems kind of normal. And there was a time where I literally was, in that half awake sleep state where I needed to be worked on. And he couldn't get me into his world, so he stepped into this one, grabbed me basically by my neck, jerked me into that other one while I was half asleep, and then worked on me and then tossed me back out. Back in, to the waking dream, so I could integrate whatever I was going to integrate. So we just have to be careful about the worlds once we kind of get our sea legs going and we've kind of melded the waking dream with the night dream and we're moving into, different attentions and we're becoming more and more conscious of everything that's going on around us. It doesn't mean that you have to like your life, and it doesn't mean that you have to love your life. It doesn't, all of these, new age belief systems. It just means that you want to have more control over and what you're participating in, and you're not being used or hooked or pulled energetically, mentally, emotionally, physically, or spiritually in any directions other than where you want to be. And you may have to actually, interact with the outside world, but how do you want to do that? That makes all the difference. So we'll go into real quick, we'll go into the looping so people can understand looping, which is basically every day you wake up, you're waking up into the same life basically, but it's hard to figure out. Sometimes it's hard to figure this out, and you have to, some people want verification that this is what's happening, that they're not really living a life, they're just looping into the same sequence, every day when they wake up, right? And this is part of the consciousness. And so I started noticing this, but I was having a really hard time working with it. And I think it was on the first interview I did with Lujan Matus, we kind of talked about the looping. And I was reading something with a dragon, one of his books, and I finally had kind of gotten my foot really solid in the looping in a way that I could explain it to my left hemisphere, because my left hemisphere wanted some technical details like how does, why, what, where, when, kind of a thing, because in order to bring the left hemisphere to utilize it for its technical abilities into a lot of this work, critical thinking is super important. Being able to use both sides of your hemisphere at will in this work in each moment is very, very, very significant and is very, very essential and important. So I finally had a situation where I could put it together. I had these events that over the last like 15 years of my life, the name Rachel would appear. I was always above. There was always some kind of violence. And so I started to be able to put these, I was attacked by a being. This is how this looping first started. And most people probably wouldn't be aware of these kinds of things happening, that, you know, you maybe think that you were attacked by a human, or there was an event and that you thought that it was a human type event, and then it wasn't. So what happened was I was living up in the mountains in this town. When I was down in the town, there was a woman who was kind of a traveler who needed to stay in the area. And there was a little bit of mind control. She ended up kind of mind controlling me a little bit, and I ended up letting her come up to where I lived, way up in the middle of nowhere. Mind you, there was like no cable TV, like 9,000 feet elevation. I was living in a super rustic cabin. The cabin didn't even have, the outhouse. It didn't have, my cell phone didn't work up there. It didn't have telephone service. You know, it didn't really have anything. And we drove up to my place in a really heavy snowstorm. And there also wasn't central heat or anything else like that. I had a fireplace that once I got home, I had to stoke in order to start warming up the cabin, blah, 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 blah. And I knew that she was a little bit off, but, you know, I was kind of I had a little bit of mind control. Now I know that she's what they call a adult black-eyed being. You know, you see a lot of conversation with the BEKs, which are the black-eyed kids, which they're not sure if they're like vampiric or they're anyway, it was my first run-in, and the good news is that she didn't touch me, so I didn't get violently ill, but it caused a looping. And in average interactions sometimes can cause these kind of looping things in your life. Anyway, so in the middle of the night, it's black, you know, and I start hearing her wake up. She's downstairs. I'm up on a loft with a very twisty, turny metal staircase that would be impossible to navigate without the lights being on. And I start to hear her screaming, Rachel, Rachel, where are you? You know, and I'm thinking, Rachel, oh no, you know, this isn't good. And then I turn the lights on, and she immediately comes up the staircase, and then she decides to lay on the floor next to me, and I'm super tired, you know, so I turn the light off, I lay down, and there's this moment where I felt like something grabbed me by the back of my hair and stood me up and made me turn the light back on. When I turned the light back on, she was standing right there in front of me, and her eyes were completely black, and she had basically a knife and a screwdriver, and she literally was going to kill me in my sleep. So I ended up having to fight her off. And then we got downstairs, and it was bigger, and she chased me down there and was trying to use like mind control stuff. I'm going to tell these people in town about you, and that you're just like this really awful person. And I was like, you need to pack your backpack and get out. And she's like, well, you know, it's like snowing out there. How could you do this? It's like, look, you're attacking me. Like, you're attacking me with a knife and a screwdriver. And mind you, I'm running around this area, you know, of this house. Good thing is I had bare doors. And finally fought her off out the door. And I could feel her lingering around the outside of the cabin. But the neighbor's dog picked her up, had a big Malamute, and the dog actually loved me and came up. And I could tell that she chased her off the dog chased her off. And, there was like about 4 feet of snow outside at that point in time, but there was really nothing I could do. There was no way that, I was going to be able to talk this person down. And I'm pretty sure that they actually weren't a person. Or they were like highly, highly possessed. I mean, one of the two. But anyway, what happened after that was like every so many years without me knowing it, right? Because, I had a little bit of stress going on for a few years because I've, kind of been living in my car since 2006. And so, when you're like living in survival, there's a big disconnect in consciousness. How many lights did I go through this morning that were green and how many were red? And did I look at people? What were some of the cars that were around me that looked like? What did the expressions on the people's face look like, as I'm getting here and there? And so I had this incident where I was living in this 2-bedroom apartment with a friend of mine for a while, temporarily, and they left. And so I was like watching their apartment. They were gone for like 3 months, I think. And a friend of mine came up from San Francisco, and she was staying with me for like 5 days. And all of a sudden, she comes running into my room and is huddled down kind of by my bed. And she's saying, there's a guy downstairs, outside the window. We could see in the window, there's an alley. There's a guy downstairs with a loaded gun. And he's breaking, the downstairs apartment's windows. And she's like, I'm terrified. What do we do? So I like woke up and I started listening to what was happening. And this guy with this loaded gun and bullets in his hand was screaming, Rachel, come out. I'm going to get you, you effing BICTH. I'm going to kill you. And it was just kind of a trip. And I said, well, I think we should move away from those windows, drag our bedding and everything to the, complete other side of the bedroom and, or the living room and huddle there. Like, the problem goes away or the police get called or whatever else. So while I'm laying there, I'm thinking, like, wow, this is a crazy, survival event, blah, 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 blah. I didn't put it together. And it wasn't until the first interview with Lujan that this actually came to the forefront of my mind, that I kept having these events where there's a crazy person, right, screaming Rachel, that is downstairs, right, that wants to do harm, wants to kill, an act of violence, there's weapons involved, and that I'm on the top floor above, and just how these things were looping back into my life, and they were the same exact looping situations. And the looping can be like more subtle, or it can be, more complicated and more advanced. But a lot of, what I've learned is that this proves to me that these are not isolated events, that these are looping events that continue to plague my life, right? So what I did was, I followed the thread, I followed the timelines, going back as far as I could to where in this physical life that somebody first called me Rachel. Because they thought that they knew me and that my name was Rachel, so that I could actually end that looping. So the thing is like, we think every day is a new day. It's not a new day. It's a looping cycle that's looping back around, that has key events in it, and there may be several different types, but it just shows us that, when we're waking up every day, that it is a program, it is not a life. It's not new, and it's not real. And it's part of the post-traumatic stress disorder event, original event, or confusion, or hooking in, or whatever else that these beings, outside of us do to keep us asleep, keep us in survival, keep us under threat, so that we can't pay attention that they're, even when we're awake, supposedly awake in this world, that our energy is not being used over and over again. And what's really interesting is, I was contemplating a few years ago, like, is this worse? Like you see a lot of these like futuristic movies where they have these people in water and they have them plugged in, right? Because they're traveling, like some kind of consciousness, and they're giving feedback to the waking people about, all the events that are going on that are in consciousness. Like, would it be worse that if that was really happening to me, maybe I could be in some pond and they could be plugged into me and they could be writing, my energetic field, or like in the, matrix kind of a thing, or, or in the waking world that I'm actually in. Maybe they're doing it that way as well. Or maybe it's just in the waking world that they keep us trapped and looping, over and over and over again into these same cycles. So that was proof to me, or proof to my left hemisphere, the whole, crazy Rachel thing that kept happening over and over and over again. And what was really interesting is every time these Rachel events happened, they were escalating. The violence was escalating in them, right? The screaming and the violence and the anger and the rage and whatever else was escalating in them to like a blowing point. So I realized, like, the next Rachel event probably could have severely physically harmed me. So it was really kind of important for me to really start actually, monitoring similarities in events that were happening to me, so that I could consciously, be aware of everything in my waking life, and, be solid with it, which means not be pulled into it, not be distracted by it, to critically think, like, which was the best way to manage this situation. And not only that, but how do I not lose my power to it? How do I not lose my energy to it and keep myself intact? And what was the best way for me to handle my participation in whatever was happening, and the best way to stop it. So that's kind of like best way that I can describe looping. And so we're being looped in and out in our waking daily life. We're not really waking up to a new life or a new day. It's always going to have the same crap in it, because that's the way it's designed to be able to feed off our energy and our power.
I have a question about when you are arriving work, to use that metaphor that's been reoccurring throughout this time, and you check in with how many stoplights. Is it less effective if you're actually driving to work and saying, okay, that's red light 1. Okay, I just passed green light number 1. Like, does that defeat the purpose, or?
No, you have to figure out, like, what's going to work best for you. Like, how are you going to be able to teach your left hemisphere that, it's not real?
Okay.
And to get past that point. And mostly it's about paying attention, right? So you talk about the 4 attentions and like the work of Carlo Castaneda and the art of dreaming and getting to the 4 attentions. Well, that's in the night dream. How do I make it through those attentions? But what do you do during the day? I pay attention. I hold my attention longer than, 2 seconds. There's a lot of kind of, new agey spiritual stuff. But I was reading this one book that made, quite a bit of sense to me. And his whole thing was that, in scientific studies, with energy fields or whatever else, that they found that in order for people to kind of manifest, new abilities or new skills in their life or overcome like mental stuff or whatever else, that they had to hold an intention for more than 15 seconds. And they would have to hold it a lot. They'd have to keep coming back to it and holding it until it became like in the front part of their mind, like mostly what they thought about, in order to make the change, or you know what I mean? So you had to pay attention, and you had to have an intent to focus in on. So you have to pay attention, to everything that's going on around you in your waking world. And you have to pay attention to everything that's going on around you in your night dream. Because it's not just, you're losing energy and you're dying. By the time people get 40, they don't even have enough energy to like take a shower or cope, or, I see so many people like in their pajamas at the grocery store. I'm like, you don't even have, that shows you how sick people are and how little energy that they have in their field.
I'm laughing because
that's leaking out.
I literally went in Homer Simpson, like, pajama bottoms to the grocery store over the weekend. Oh, my God. That's funny. It's sad, but it's funny. It's true. You're right. You're absolutely right.
If you're worn out and you're exhausted, then you better start paying attention.
Right.
Yeah. Because you're losing energy and you're using power, and it's killing you.
Right. Each day that you continue to loop. Yeah.
Yeah. Each day you wake up and you think it's a new reality, and it's not, and you do the same thing, basically. Wow. Over and over again. And so let's go back to something Albert Einstein said, right?
Allegedly said.
No, allegedly said. All right. So, but, you keep doing the same things over and over again and expecting a different result. The definition of insanity. So, you have to pay attention.
Right.
Because your attention matters. It matters to your quality of life. Like, you may not be able to change. This is why a lot of these shamanic type people, once they, can accelerate their energy fields and hold their energy field and don't have limitation anymore, can leave this world, is they don't like it here. It's a bad world. And if these people couldn't fix it, I'm not so sure we can. But, maybe if there's enough of us that start to pay attention, and can hold intention longer, and actually, utilize our brains instead of trying to grasp onto some kind of new age, crap that is kind of leading us astray as well. Because,
right.
There are components in a lot of this kind of stuff that are probably true and beneficial, but what's happened over the last 2,000 years is that they have burned a lot of this information. They've burned the most important part, or they've eradicated the most important parts of it, so it's not clean and pure anymore. For example, it blows me away that all these people get, make all these things, science and UFO people and all this other stuff. There was, out of, 15 books that the Mayans wrote, and all of it was like symbolic language, and it had all their different symbols in there and how explained it and all this other stuff. One survived, and they have decided that they are specialists in the Mayan culture and their time clocks and all this other stuff. How do you do that from one book?
Well, I always
made it up.
You're right.
Made it up.
Yes.
And they don't go to the indigenous people and ask them,
right,
about what it is or what it means, because some of them carry the information for 3,000 years. So, a lot of them have, but nobody asked them. They just make it up. So your whole system is made up, even off what you consider spiritual or new age. It's all made up.
Right. Well,
so you can't trust it.
Right, exactly. And with 1 minute to go, I do want to say I concur with you, which is why I always say get over your guru addiction. because, you know, this certification, that title, this, that, this claim, you got to vet before you get services, I would say. And I just want to say to all you listeners out there, thank you for tuning in. We've been talking with Bridgette Lyn Dolgoff, extraordinaire expert in everything galore. We hope to see you again tomorrow at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time here on Steampunk Radio with 2 E's. This is Karen, the host, signing off from the new way. Have a great day. Tomorrow's hump day.